As somebody who's experienced panic attacks on and off for the majority of his life, let me tell you that overcoming them is no easy task. However, there are two key principles that I really want you to take away from this video that I believe are going to help you significantly more than anything else. Just before we get into what these two principles are, I think it's super important to acknowledge that the emergence of literally every single panic attack is going to have one of two elements behind it, or a combination of both of these things. And what these two elements are number one, our body struggling to unconsciously interpret its surroundings, and number two, behavioral characteristics from past experiences or conditioning from a younger age, and how that has affected our perception of certain situations, and as a result, we might respond disproportionately to a certain environment. So there's a combination going on of unconscious physiological factors and more conscious psychological factors. But which one do we address first? And is it pivotal to address one before the other? You have to start off by fine-tuning certain neural mechanisms existing within your nervous system and brain to allow your body to start to take on board more accurate sensory stimuli from its environment at an unconscious level, so that your body in turn starts to respond more appropriately. You may have noticed this if you're somebody who's prone to experiencing panic attacks, how some of your biggest triggers are literally just mundane sensory cues existing within your environment, like sudden changes in temperature, changes in visual stimuli, or changes to the lighting or noise of your immediate settings. And this can actually go one step further, where your body struggles to interpret the likes of gravity, and so standing up, changing body position, or moving in a particular way can actually stress your body's capabilities to a point where it starts to induce certain symptoms that closely resemble those of a panic attack. What all of these things come under the bracket of, though, is a brain that is struggling to accurately integrate sensory information from its environment. And the reason why this is coming about is because some degree of injury or dysfunction has occurred to receptors and pathways existing within our sensory nervous system, which is part of our peripheral nervous system. And as a result, mismatched neuronal signaling is constantly delivered to our brain, and all of this becomes far too overwhelming for our brain to actually process. So as a result, what it does is it hijacks our own conscious attention, which forces us to retreat to a calmer and less stimulating environment. So this first aspect of recovering from panic attacks has nothing to do with our personality or mentality, and everything to do with our inbuilt neuronal circuitry and how well equipped it actually is to be able to handle certain aspects of our surroundings. Understand that if there are dysfunctions existing within this system but left unaddressed, then it has the potential of massively reducing your body's tolerance to a number of activities and environments that otherwise would have been very simple and straightforward to navigate. Imagine going about everyday errands with a ball and chain attached around your ankle. Well, in some respects, this situation is comparable to that, just at a deeper and more concealed level. Because you see, there is actually a technical element to this, because the cortex, which are these two large hemispheres at the top of our brain, must receive accurate sensory information in order to charge the inhibitory functions of the basal ganglia, which is the area of the brain that sits just beneath it. And these inhibitory functions of the basal ganglia actually suppress limbic and cognitive activity. So any breakdowns that end up appearing within this system can ultimately lead to heightened levels of attention, arousal, and irrational thinking, which it goes without saying are all prime attributes of those who regularly experience panic attacks. I personally believe that the best way of resolving this specific issue is by having the function of your brain and nervous system thoroughly assessed in person, and then having any identified areas of weakness or hypotonicity reconditioned through certain targeted exercises. And this was achieved in my own situation with the help of a trained chiropractic neurologist. I am well aware that there are tons of people out there who have written books, articles, or made videos online who recommend this all guns blazing approach of just fully immersing yourself in very challenging situations and then welcoming the feeling of panic. However, I think it's so important to rule out this point first before deciding to venture down that pathway. And if you would like to learn more about the exact steps that you need to follow in order to balance out these neurological systems so that your body can remain much more relaxed whenever it's faced with these unfamiliar or potentially triggering situations, then make sure to check out the Unbeatable Blueprint online course. Okay, so at the start of this video, I alluded to the fact that there are two key principles in overcoming panic attacks. One, which we've already spoken about, is the physiological element, but the other is a psychological or behavioral element, where physiological is more concerned with preparing your body beforehand. Psychological is more about exposure and actually facing the things that scare you head on. So of course there are lots of details in between, but really when it comes down to it, recovery from panic attacks really boils down to two things: preparation and exposure. Now, it goes without saying that panic attacks are absolutely terrifying, especially when you're in one. However, the irony of the whole situation is that in order to overcome them, you actually have to position yourself in situations where you encourage panic attacks to happen to you and you actually invite that feeling in. You see, every time you sense the onset of a panic attack and you decide to either avoid confronting that situation or you want to escape from it, what you're inadvertently telling your body is that that situation is a threat. And so the idea of a fight or flight response is actually justified, and you're reinforcing that response from your body. Whereas if you stay present and just remain with the feeling, 9 times out of 10, it naturally fades away, and you're left with an overwhelming feeling of peace and calmness. But not only that, the irony is that you actually look forward to immersing yourself in that situation second time round, knowing that your body can actually handle it. And that's the process of how you incrementally expand your comfort zone and train your body to have a much greater tolerance to unfamiliar or daunting scenarios. Imagine a situation where the letter A represents a feeling of being totally terrified to leave your own home, and the letter Z represents total freedom and independence. What our goal should be is that we want to get from A to C so that the letter B then becomes our new normal. And then after a period of time, you'll suddenly start to sense this feeling of curiosity where you want to push into understanding what the letter D feels like. And as a result, you decide to push down that pathway. And after coming out the other end completely unscathed, what you would have done without even being aware of it is move the goalpost in your favour so that now C, whatever that might be, becomes your new normal. This is how you start to gradually transition your mind and body into perceiving more environments and circumstances as safe and non-threatening. And it's also how the feelings of panic and the symptoms associated with it gradually begin to dissipate. Now, I would just like to add the point that I'm well aware that what can trigger the psyche into initiating a panic attack can be very subjective to each individual, based on certain conditioning from a younger age, certain past negative experiences, traumatic events, ingrained beliefs, whatever it might be. So it might be worth working alongside a practitioner to try to undo these ways of thinking and correct these patterns. But even just by yourself, it can be super useful to write down a list of all the past panic attacks that you experienced, what you believe the onset was that links all of them together, and see if you can come to a deeper understanding of what it is that actually triggers them. Something that I found really helped me personally in confronting panic attacks, especially in social environments, was to drop any sort of ego or label that I attached to myself of how I wanted to look or come across in a particular situation, to completely let go and allow my body to do whatever it's going to do, knowing that full well, if anything bad were to happen in that moment, then there'd more than likely be some kind-hearted member of the public to help me out. In fact, if you are able to detach from your ego and become a little more vulnerable, then one neat little trick is to actually tell the group of people within your vicinity that you're prone to experiencing panic attacks. The vast majority of people will be totally understanding and actually grateful that you opened up to them. And also, when you feel as though you have nothing left to hide, you actually start to fear the panic symptoms much less, which ironically reduces the chances of them reappearing. The final thing I want to add that I think really helped me was changing my whole attitude towards panic attacks, from going from this very frustrated, angry and resentful feeling of them to just fully accepting and embracing them, knowing full well that they're just a safety mechanism that my body puts in place for me. You can even go one step further and be thankful and grateful that your body is looking out for you. I've had it before where I've literally been in the middle of a panic attack, and what I've said to myself is, thank you very much for looking out for me, but everything's gonna be okay. Panic attacks are a weird phenomenon whereby the more that you focus on them, the more you'll actually end up experiencing them. A bit similarly to if you really want a good night's sleep and you keep willing your body to want to go to sleep, and that ironically ends up being the worst night's sleep that you had in weeks. All you can do is prepare your body in the best possible way, embrace new and unfamiliar environments, and then let whatever's going to happen ultimately happen.